Our club has always been a forum for public figures, thought leaders, and decision makers to share their ideas. Here, we offer access to dynamic political, business, and public personalities.
We are dedicated to encouraging debate on the issues that matter to this city, this province, and this country.
The Canadian Club is one of the most important podiums anywhere in the world that a Canadian can speak to, tell Canadians what it is that they think, develop those thoughts. And so I want to thank you for that very, very much.
Please join me in thanking our esteemed panelists today.
Through our programs and events, including our youth and young leaders programs, our diversity partnerships, our joint events, and our media and social media opportunities, we offer you access to dynamic political, social, and business figures from abroad and right here at home.
The platform from which the eloquence of Canada has flowed all of that time, whether it be business, education, politics, sports, arts, and culture. If someone wants to say something to Canadians about this country and about the future of this country, this is the venue you choose.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Canadian blah, 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 blah. Good afternoon and welcome to the Canadian Club Toronto. My name is David Simmons and I'm president of the club for this season. Let me acknowledge as we're starting that I'm joining you from downtown Toronto, the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wapatak people, the original caretakers of this land. Since the beginning of the pandemic, Canada has seen heightened innovation in financial services, everything from greater demand for digital solutions to forging new regulatory paths in cryptocurrency. Today, as part of our 125th season signature series event, we host Michael Katchen, co-founder and CEO of Wealthsimple. He'll engage in a conversation on the rapidly evolving fintech space here in Canada and around the world. Before we hear from today's speakers, let me review a couple of housekeeping notes for you. You can click the switch stream button. That may help you if you find that your connection is slow. Video quality will decrease, but audio quality will remain strong. Once you click the questions tab, you can enter questions into the window and they'll be sent to our moderator for use. And you can click the request help button located at the bottom right of the corner of your page for technical support. I want to take a moment to thank our event sponsors for helping us make today's event possible, Osler and Power Corporation of Canada. The Canadian Club is a nonprofit organization that's had the privilege of gathering Canadians for over 125 years. It's because of our sponsors that we're able to do that. So thank you for your continued support. Now, let me introduce today's speakers. Michael Katchen is co-founder and CEO of Wealthsimple. He's been called an industry mover by the Financial Post, a change agent by Canada Business Magazine, and one of Toronto Life's 50 most influential people. He's also been called a cool cat from his colleagues at Western. He's an active member of the Canadian Business Council, the Wealthsimple Foundation, which is an initiative that helps children from low-income families save for post-secondary education. He truly is a great Canadian. Today's discussion will be moderated by Andrea Mandel-Campbell. She's a financial communications executive, board member, and best-selling author, and we're very privileged to have her as a director here at the Canadian Club. Another tradition of our club that we've maintained during this lockdown is a toast to our country, Canada. If you've got a glass, join me in a toast to Canada. Over to you, Andrea.
Thank you so much, David. And it's so great to see you, Mike. We are so excited here at the club, and I know our audience is so excited to hear from you today. It's so important, I think, for Canadians to hear from leaders like you at such an important time, such an inflection point, I think, for all Canadians and the world. So first, I just want to say welcome.
Well, thank you so much for having me. You know, it's always been my dream to spend more time with you. Folks don't know, but Andrea's got her book back on the just behind her there, Why Mexicans Don't Drink Molson, which I've been talking about for years, ever since I moved back to Canada, is one of my favorite books. So I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me.
No, it's great, and so glad to be doing this. So let's start with that. It's a big question, but let's start there. And I think it's something that's probably on a lot of people's a list of questions. We've obviously had a bit of a wild ride over the last couple of years. We've seen, and the overused word, unprecedented change, this incredible acceleration in the adoption of technology. And we are seeing companies that have had to change and pivot in real time now. I'd love if you could kind of take us to within Wealthsimple and talk to us a little bit about how Wealthsimple has changed and evolved over the last 2 years, as well as how you as a leader have changed as well.
I mean, it's a year that had no playbooks, and I bet any leader could get up and talk about just how bizarre and challenging the year has been. I mean, there's no question we are one of the incredibly fortunate companies of the last 2 years. I mean, the pandemic, for whatever reasons, spurred an unprecedented demand for investing, and we found ourselves, right at the center of that. And to put it in perspective, we entered the pandemic with one product almost. We were mostly a robo-advisor, a long-term managed account for long-term investing. And we had about 250 people heading into the pandemic. We exit now. I mean, I hope we exit the pandemic. I mean, but here we are 2 years later. We have 5 products. So we help people with their long-term investing, trading needs, cryptocurrencies, everyday spending and saving, and tax prep. We have more than 2 million clients, with 1 in 5 young adults in Ontario as customers. And the team has grown from 250 or so to about 1,100 today. So it's just been this unprecedented growth on all fronts in our business, and all in this remote environment where there was no, if you're asking about things I've learned as a leader, I mean, there was no playbook. No one had really done that before. I've never worked at a company really of this scale, or a team of this scale, let alone led one. And to grow from 250 to 1,100 in the pandemic, where people don't have the same sorts of connections to their colleagues, social ties to their managers, that I think form the backbone of what we would have thought of as culture in the olden days, has been a super interesting challenge. That's for sure.
What would you say is, one of your biggest learnings from this time then?
I mean, this has not only been an interesting year for scale. We talked about scaling and growth. I mean, if you think about the last 2 years, we've also had to deal with deep social fears, about health and the pandemic. That certainly was the theme as we entered this 2 years ago. And I think the big lesson there was showing up and showing your people that you care, and creating open communication with your team, where they, even though they were at a distance, felt like there was an organization and a team there that had their backs. How much more so as we move through the social upheaval, as the pandemic went on, with the murder of George Floyd, and just the incredible push from society towards more equity and inclusion and diversity at all levels of an organization. And I think the lesson on all of that is just the importance of being an authentic leader, the importance of communication and context. And, I think the interesting part is none of us would have guessed that you can do a lot of that through things like Zoom and all the other video conferencing software out there. It's been an interesting learning, but just how to show up for your team would be, I guess, the biggest lesson I've taken away.
And as you mentioned, you've grown incredibly and scaled incredibly over the last couple of years. And you've expanded, from your origins, as you say, from a robo-advisor looking to provide a low-cost alternative for passive investing, kind of trying to break through the establishment. And we do know here in Canada, we have, we pay high fees for a lot of investing, and you wanted to break that mold, and you've gone from that and moved into a whole bunch of different verticals. So my question to you is, as you think about it, is your goal here to become a challenger bank? And if so, what does that look like?
I mean, it might sound cutesy, but the way we talk about it internally is Canada doesn't need another bank. We need something better than a bank.
Okay.
And I think that's what our intention is our goal is to become what we call the primary money relationship in our clients' lives. We may never need to become a bank to do that. And the sets of services that we intend to offer may look nothing like what you might expect from a bank today. And an example is a few years ago, we bought this tax prep business called Simple Tax. It helped more than 1.5 million or so Canadians file their taxes last year. Just a wonderful business that really makes the experience of filing your taxes easy. But that's not good enough for us. I mean, one of the things we're trying to do is within a few years, take people's investment accounts and relationship that they have with us, their savings and spending accounts, and use all the data that we capture through that to actually automate your tax filing. So come tax season, use that data to pre-fill your tax return and turn what is one of the most stressful moments of the year for everybody. Everybody has to do their taxes and no one likes it, and literally make it disappear for clients. And I think that's when we talk about Canadians need something better than a bank, that's what we think about is, how do you remove the friction that's getting in the way of Canadians making good, sound financial decisions, ultimately achieving their financial goals and outcomes. And the highest order of that is achieving financial freedom, which we see as one of the greatest forces for good on the planet.
So when you look out over the horizon, then, when you say better than a bank, are you saying that you expect that Canadians will interact in terms of their financial services in ways right now that, we don't even imagine?
Yeah, is anybody asking for automated tax filing today? Mm-hmm. I don't even think Canadians, I think the bar, this not to just swipe at Canada, I think the bar in financial services is so low that, the opportunity to innovate, to create these delightful experiences that just add so much value to people's lives is enormous. And the thing that gets me the most excited about this industry is, for so long, the greatest entrepreneurs, the greatest tech companies stayed away because the high bar of the regulatory hurdle to get into this industry, the real deep-seated, role of incumbents. This is a high trust industry. It takes a lot to earn trust from clients to be able to manage and help them with their life savings, kept folks away. And that's changed. And just the amount of innovation and the speed at which this industry is moving, it's like nothing this industry, I think, has ever seen before. And we're just at the start of that journey. So that gets me excited about what it means for Canadians and the possibilities in front of us.
Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about, where some of these opportunities are and the regulatory opportunities, for lack of a better word. Crypto is obviously on everybody's mind these days, and I'm starting to receive questions already from the audience, many of which are, directed at crypto. It's being described, we've heard regulators describe this as the Wild West. You've moved into this space, pretty aggressively, I would say. Can you give us a sense of, first of all, where you see this sector going, or crypto going? Is it here to stay? And what are the regulatory barriers, if there are, to really taking advantage of this new and emerging space?
Happy to. And I know crypto is a controversial topic and on a lot of people's policymakers and the industry's minds. And to state my point of view is that the underlying technology of blockchain and all of the things and use cases that we're seeing enabled by that in the world of decentralized finance, decentralized autonomous organizations, and I hate to throw out some buzzwords, we can go into any of those if it's interesting, is incredible. And the smartest people in technology and the smartest engineers are flocking to build applications in this space, which is generally the thing that we see at the cusp of any major technology revolution. What last was mobile, before that was the internet, before that was the PC. And so there is something to this technology that is just wildly exciting. There's also a heck of a lot of speculation going on. And I maintain personally no particular point of view on the long-term value of any cryptocurrency. I think I hold equal parts that Bitcoin could become a reserve, Perhaps, why not? But also, it could not be anything of value ever. And only time will tell. I think the guidance that we try to give our clients who want to participate is it's okay to participate so long as you're being responsible. I actually saw a tweet from a client just this morning that was something like, I'm so glad Wealthsimple warned me 3 times before placing my first crypto trade that I better not lose all my money. You know, just how do you, people want access to this industry. There could be a lot of value created, but how do you help people do it in a responsible way is something that's the approach we've tried to take. But there's no question that the underlying value in this technology is just tremendous. And then there's the question of the regulatory front. And I actually think there's some good news in Canada, but some things that are really important to get right as we forecast out the next several years. You know, Canada was one of the first countries in the world to issue a license for offering cryptocurrencies, and Wealthsimple was the beneficiary of that. So we elected to actually work within the regulatory regime for all the right reasons of, you know, when you think about the job of a regulator, about how to help protect clients and ensure the integrity of capital markets, we think those same principles are extremely important in the world of crypto. And it is the Wild West, and a lot of players operate outside of that regime, which I think should give people a lot of pause. And I think is a challenge for the regulators right now is how to bring this industry into the fold when you have so many, especially international players, that are just operating outside of it entirely. So that's the part we're doing well. Is Canadians set up a regime for getting licensed. They have a monitoring program. I think what they're trying to do, and frankly need to move a little faster on, is how to get the industry into compliance on that. But then there's the second piece, which I think is super important for policymakers, which is this industry holds so much promise that if we do the typical Canadian thing of let's just wait and see what happens everywhere else, we will not benefit from it. And it is so early in the days of this industry that Canada could plant a flag and say, we want to help the smartest people that want to be working on, you know, crypto projects, companies on the blockchain, do it from Canada. And we're going to actually articulate some of the challenging pieces of how to do that in a regulatory compliant way, how we're going to help people fit into the traditional kind of legal system around it, and create the conditions for companies to do it and to do it responsibly, but do it here. I would love to see us take a step in that direction, but I haven't yet seen the appetite and the will from policymakers to really plant a flag there. I'll stop rambling.
You have not. Have you? I mean, what you're raising is a really important point. Have you been speaking to political leaders about this? Have you put this on their radar? Have you tried to underscore the opportunity here?
We have, and we continue to. And I think there's been receptivity. But the challenge for policymakers and regulators is speed has never been, I think what we would use to describe how those two stakeholders move. And I think one of the most fascinating parts of this industry is just the speed at which it is changing and moving and iterating. And I think until there is a change in will that it becomes such a priority that people move with haste to articulate that framework that says, hey, here, Canada wants to be the friendliest place in the world to build a decentralized finance company. And we're going to create those conditions and we're going to do it by this date. I think until that happens, I worry we're just never going to be able to catch up to the pace at which the industry is moving.
And I mean, what would you, I mean, two questions, a bit of a double prong. What would you say are some of those key conditions? And what do you think that window of opportunity is? Like what kind of timeline are we talking about here?
I mean, I would say sooner is better.
If I take to say, if we don't do something in the next 2 years, we've kind of missed the boat.
Yeah, it's hard to guess, but it's moving so fast. I'd even say that I'd love to see it by the end of this year. We've created that framework, and the things that come to mind, the first is clarity. I mean, so many of the crypto platforms around the world are just struggling with what are the rules for of the road here? How do I know if I'm operating within them or not? And creating a regime that just spells that out with clarity, I think would be actually just a huge first step. The second, which I think is a little non-obvious, is a lot of the tax and legal implications. Mm-hmm. Many of these new crypto projects being built on the blockchain don't have a traditional framework around, a management team or jurisdictions, and as a result, there's just a tremendous amount of ambiguity around potential taxes and legal repercussions if there's ever an issue. And I think just creating clarity on some of those key issues. So regulatory, legal, and creating that ability to almost become the analogy I like to use is the Delaware Corp for crypto companies. Why shouldn't that be, the Ontario Corp or the Alberta Corp or the Canada Corp? So all of the conditions that would have to be true to create that clarity.
Okay. And what would you say, are the implications if we don't, more tangibly, if we don't plant that flag, if we
listen, let's make it more broad than crypto, because crypto's, I think personally, I find it enormously exciting. I think important to our business and the financial services industry. So I think it's important that we as a country become crypto literate. At the very least, I would love us to aspire to more than that and actually become a leader and plant a flag. I think the broader point is Andrea's book, which, had an enormous impact on me, and asked the question why Mexicans don't drink Molson. And the premise, and she'll keep me honest here, is, we do two things in Canada. This is the story of our economy. We pull things out of the ground and we finance that activity. And that has been a wonderful business to be in for many decades. It is the source of so much we take for granted and so much of the prosperity that we have enjoyed. But if it is the story that we tell our kids in 20 years, I believe we are in trouble. And we have not proven our ability to compete in a broader set of industries, or even in those core industries at the highest levels on a global basis, period. And that needs to change. And my belief is the only ways to do that in the required time frame, if we want to protect the way of life we have and the things we hold most dear as Canadians, is through knowledge-based economy. It's, industries. So technology, the industries in which technology is playing a major role in transforming and enabling and disrupting. And that's why crypto fits into me, because it is a knowledge-based economy. It is moving so fast. We have the opportunity to compete because the major input is human capital. And we need to double down our investments in human capital to compete. So I think our immigration policies are some of the ones that actually set Canada up uniquely to be successful. I think we need to do the same in education. And I'll again stop rambling. But that's why I feel so strongly about this, is we need to diversify the sources of our prosperity, our economy long term. And I just feel like we need to do it now.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. So let's. There's a whole bunch of questions, but what you're saying, is kind of prompting me to pivot a little bit to one of my questions, which is a broader question around the tech ecosystem in general and how important that is to our economy. And we've seen some, the last 2 years have been incredible. The amount of capital that we've raised. I think it was a week or two ago, 1Password raised almost $700 million. It was a Canadian record, just beating Wealthsimple, I think. But we need more
of those, more records.
Exactly.
Great.
But at the same time, there's some grumblings afoot that the AI strategy, the artificial intelligence strategy that was unveiled a couple of years ago, which we plowed a bunch of money into that sector. We wanted to plant that flag, as you say, wanted to be really a world leader. And we have, some of the bright lights and visionaries in that space, but there's concern that investment in academic and research has not translated into the commercialization side of things. And, a lot of that talent is now being drawn back down south. So I guess my question is, what is your sense of the health of the tech ecosystem right now? Does it have the staying power at this point? Have we reached that critical mass, or are we in danger, do you think, of kind of reliving our past mistakes around, acquisitions and relocations and just, industries like cannabis that have great potential and then, kind of implode on themselves?
I feel more optimistic than ever before about the tech industry here. When I moved back to Canada in 2013 or so, there weren't very many companies of scale that you could look to for inspiration in the technology sector. There were not very many Canadian companies getting meaningful funding. And this was the narrative that you heard, is Canadians build companies and they kind of get to a scale of tens of millions of dollars of value creation, and then they sell to some US counterpart. I mean, that has changed in a big way in the last 2 years. And even, years ago when we were fundraising, we were told that Canada is too small a market to be interesting. So the US players, when you think about the inputs into building a technology company, it's human capital and financial capital is two of the big ones. We had a lot of the human capital. We didn't have that many that had seen tremendous scale before. So that was always a challenge. And we didn't have that many capital partners that were willing to bet on Canadian companies. I think it'd be hard to say that that's still true today. And the number of entrepreneurs I've met that are focused even on the domestic Canadian market and managing to raise significant amounts of capital from top tier global venture capitalists is astounding. And many of them talk to me about how that just wasn't true, 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. So I think something has changed. And one of the major inputs has been unlocked around financial capital, which I'm very excited about. And then the second is because we have had several companies for the first time in a cohort get to scale. We also are starting to build the talent and the leadership that are required to do it again. When you think about the input to the ecosystem of like Silicon Valley, and just one of the major aspects that's not talked about is the recycling of talent. People that were at Apple in the early days that then went on to other companies. And to this day, the people were at Facebook early that then went on to, seed the next generation of companies. And we have that now. We have Shopify, I think, in a huge way to thank for creating that density of talent, but they're not alone. We have a tremendous amount of really successful at scale companies now, and we're benefiting because we hire as many of them as we can get, and they're going on and they're starting their own companies too. And that's just, I think, different and so promising for the future of our ecosystem.
So you would say then that inflection point is, there's a foundation there that you believe has legs to, make this a cornerstone of our economy on a go-forward basis.
I believe more so than ever before in Canadian history. I think that's true. And you mentioned kind of the AI strategy and why won't this just fizzle out? I think the challenge is there's governments aren't going to build successful technology companies, and so it's not incumbent on government or policymakers to do that. I think they can accelerate things, and if we want to pick on the AI example, I think we made 2 mistakes. That if we were to replicate that strategy with new sectors, I'd probably want to push us to reconsider. The first, we were late. We had AI talent that was world-class doing cutting-edge research for decades, but not until AI became the hottest thing in the world that Facebook and Google and every other major technology company in the world was paying top dollar to go recruit that talent, did we say we want to play in that game and we want to cultivate our sector. And we're not going to compete with some of these incredible corporate organizations and the pay packages they can put in front of people and the investments that they're willing to make. So one is we were late. We need to be a little bit more bold in taking bets on which industries are up and coming and be a little faster to the game. And 2, we can't do the classic Canadian peanut butter strategy, which is, everybody needs a taste. We got to spread it out evenly. And so every single province that has an AI academic institution needs to get the same dollars or meaningful dollars. We need to, in tech, there's the Pareto principle, which is just, it's a small number of companies that produce or institutions that produce an outsized set of the gains. We need to get more comfortable betting on winners. And the Canadian analogy I love to give, because this often people look at me, they're like, oh, but that's so non-Canadian. Ugh, it makes you feel like icky. It's like, do people remember when we had the Vancouver Olympics and we had the Own the Podium campaign? Yeah. It was the most un-Canadian in some ways thing that we've ever done. And it was so incredibly energizing and successful.
We liked winning.
Man, it feels good to win. Yes. It feels good to win. And so, I think we need a little bit more of the Own the Podium mindset and be okay placing some bets, into the future a little earlier. Okay. So if you had to place a bet, where would you place it? I think I've already tipped my hat on where that's going to be. I mean, for me, I believe that blockchain has the potential to produce some of the biggest companies in the world in the coming decades. And there's so many more questions unanswered today than clarity about where this industry is moving. And that's why it's such a challenge. And that's why policymakers and regulators are so slow. It's not an easy thing to figure out. I don't want to, when I get excited about this, I don't want to in any way want to diminish the challenge. But that's the kind of opportunity I'd love to see us lean into. Say, these are big challenges, but we're going to put our best and brightest on it. We're going to figure it out, and we're going to do it in a very responsible, trusted way so that Canadians play a role in leading this industry on a global basis. I mean, that would be a much more exciting outcome than let's wait and see how everybody else does it and then try to play catch up.
Well, talking about that, I wanted to tackle another theme, which is open banking. And, and you talked earlier about, about the, how we're going to move quickly. Now, open banking, which is for our audience is, it's also described as consumer directed finance. And basically it's putting, and correct me, Michael, because you'll have this more than I will, but it's basically giving power to the people in terms of owning their own data and being able to, which currently their financial data is housed in the banks. It gives them that data and a portability and the ability to move it around and be able to choose the kind of products and services and who gives them and providing rails to allow them to do that. Is that a fair description?
Totally.
Okay. So, this is something that we've been talking about, or the world's been talking about for several years now. And the government has been dragging its feet on this and just recently came out to say that, they'll begin implementing in 2023 when the UK has been doing this for a while now. Australia's been doing this for a while now, as well as a number of other countries. Can you tell us first, I guess, why Canadians should care about this? And number two, have we missed the boat when it comes to open banking and being a leader in that?
I mean, I feel like the principle of open banking is hard to disagree with. I mean, consumers should have choice of who to share their data with. And from a financial perspective, meaning that they can get better advice, access to, share it with services that can be useful and valuable to them, it should be non-controversial. I think the more important meta theme is just historically financial services is operated in this closed system. Institutions are pretty closed. They try and build walled gardens around their customers. They don't really want to share them or share their data with anybody else. And there's this fear that if we open it up, what will that mean to the competitiveness of these institutions? What will it mean to the integrity of the system? These are some of the fears I hear around open banking, some of the fears I hear about the real-time rails and payments modernization conversation. But I think if we look around the world, most examples of creating a more open and flexible financial system where people are granted more choice, where we create a more level competitive playing field that introduces new players that just raise the bar on what the value prop has got to be for customers, you get net great results. And so examples, Brazil, in a government-sponsored program, introduced the PIX payments rails, which is, pseudo like our Interact system. And within, some unbelievably shorter period of time, captured a third of all Brazilians using this. And it's a new rails that sits alongside debit and credit and has just become this incredible success story almost overnight in Brazil, which gives people more portability on payments, lower cost options of how to pay each other or pay merchants. And you've now seen the adoption of new businesses being built on this. That's just super promising, new value that can be created in an ecosystem like that. I think that Canada could stand to benefit from more openness. The challenge is when things take as long as they do. Open banking has been in discussions for a very, very long time. The industry just moves so fast, and we risk losing domestic players as we start to see more global competition in financial services. And a funny story or not so funny story, depends on, I guess, your point of view on this, is one of the great kind of global fintech companies right now is a company called Revolut, out of the UK. I think they were valued at something like $40 or $50 billion in their most recent financing. So, a very incredible story of scale and success in the UK market. They are live in something like 15 or 20 countries, I want to say. There's only one country they've ever pulled out of, Canada. And that's not to say the next companies will pull out of Canada and may be coming here having grown up in environments that were more open, that enabled them to have more innovative solutions that are more competitive, frankly, than what we're able to build in Canada in our current infrastructure. So I think that's one of the risks of Canada not moving fast enough, is we're not letting our domestic players have a shot at competing domestically, let alone internationally, which is another thing we need more of. But even domestically in the long term, it's a risk.
I mean, and that's part of the challenge. And I will say one of the theses of my book is that if you don't have the competitive landscape in your own country, it really makes it hard for you then to go out and compete internationally, because you haven't had
it's
that.
It's a different game.
It's a
different game. Yeah.
And I guess the challenge is for a lot of Canadians, they don't know what they're missing, really, right?
It's, I hate to put it this way. We've benefited from that. It is easier to build a business in Canada. There's fewer competition, is, in general, often less sophisticated competition that I think is a problem. I think we want Canadian companies to win because they are the best in the world at what they do, not because they simply had better market conditions in which to build their business.
So tell us a little bit more about that, because you've made a decision to really focus on Canada. So when you think about growing and scaling in Canada, what would you say are some of those critical factors to, scaling growth here?
There's lots. For us, we touched on a few of those ingredients between capital, talent. I think it is interesting to note just how much new foreign capital is coming into Canada. There's two sides to that. The one is great because it didn't used to. The other is, where is the Canadian capital willing to bet on, homegrown startups at early stages in big ways? I think the human capital piece is better than it's ever been and only getting better by the day. We have some of the best and brightest in the world, and more coming here every day from around the world because of how wonderful Canada is. And I think that is a huge long-term advantage for us. I think where we need to be better, definitely on the regulatory fronts. We have bright spots, as we've talked about, but we also have major challenges. In the securities industry alone, we have a provincial system which creates all sorts of challenges when you think about the scale of trying to adopt policies, procedures, products to a single jurisdiction versus a national. I think that's a story in Canada where, we need more harmonization across provinces of just standards and regulatory regimes. That would be an enormous competitive advantage for us if we could figure that out. Not easy, but again, let's lean into some of those challenges. It would be my point of view. Looks like you have something to say on that.
Well, it's always amazed me that, that we don't have a national securities regulator. And I wrote about this back in the day, I'm going to say more than 15 years ago. And, the former finance minister, Jim Flaherty, God bless him, he tried his best, and he couldn't get it to work. And, I can't remember, it was probably 6 months ago, they finally, gave up the ghost on this. And I just think if we can't figure that out, it doesn't.
It's funny because I think if you ask reasonable people on some of these challenges we face at the highest level, you'd say, well, obviously some of these things got to get fixed. And I don't know where along the process that either the will or the challenges just become so overwhelming that we don't get there. But we need to figure out how to push through and make things happen. I've even heard in the last several years just how much money Canada leaves on the table by having inconsistent trade standards across provinces. Mm-hmm. It's something like a meaningful 1 to 2, even percentage points of GDP that could be unlocked by simple harmonization. It's like, where else are we going to find that kind of growth? Like, standards, like it should be easy to figure that out, right? So we need the will to lean into some of these challenges and figure them out. And I do think a lot of them come down to the regulatory. I mean, I know in your book, it's years ago now, you wrote about how just protectionist policies and this point of view of, we do have this nice cozy oligopoly that exists across several industries in Canada, and we want to protect that, is something that will come back to bite us in the long term, where we cannot create those conditions in perpetuity. And I think that we need regulatory modernization, and in particular, a new frameworks that are able to adjust and move quickly. If you think about, if we're regulating every industry with rules that were written decades and decades ago, and you think about how much life has changed in the last 10 and 20 years, and just the speed at which it takes to change a new rule or introduce a new rule. I mean, you do the math and you see the curves. It's just, we're never going to keep pace if we keep doing things the way we do things.
Yeah.
And so we need to figure out just a much more iterative way to create a regulatory conditions for operating, let alone thriving, just operating, in this world.
No, I couldn't agree more. I have a bunch of questions here, some of them more tactical from our audience, but who are very curious about a few things you're planning with Wealthsimple, if I can go there. One of those questions, when does Wealthsimple plan to be able to enable transfers of crypto to external wallets?
Great question. And I guess the short answer is coming soon.
Okay. Do you think Canada's payments modernization initiative has moved fast enough? Well, we talked a little bit about that, to keep up with the demands of Canadians.
The short answer is no. I mean, I think one thing that we're thrilled about is Wealthsimple was just accepted as a member of Payments Canada, and we're excited to have a seat at the table and to try to help participate in the new real-time rails framework that has been delayed a few times, but I think is such a wonderful step in the right direction. And rather than sitting on the sidelines and continuing to say, we need to move faster, we decided to go and actually apply to be a member, which was accepted recently, and hope to be a part of that change from the inside, which we're very excited about.
Okay. And following on it, we touched on this a little bit, but do you think stablecoins will play an important role in the future of Canadian payments and financial innovation?
I think that's an interesting question, and something I've actually spent some time on with several policymakers and central bankers recently. And again, I see it as something that we ought to lean into. You see stablecoins having tremendous utility across a few industries. I mean, the biggest one right now is trading, where a huge percentage of US trades today are settling in USD and USDC. But there's good reasons for that. US dollar is a global reserve currency. The Canadian is not. But I get excited about some of the applications and payments, the opportunity to build low-cost payments infrastructure for merchants, I think is a huge unlock. If you think about interchange, it exists for good reason. I think the networks and the credit card companies and debit card businesses create enormous value for payments infrastructure and the whole economy to keep moving, but it's a huge tax on small businesses. And there are lower cost, exciting, real-time ways that just make it better, faster, cheaper coming. And I think, a stable coin could be part of that, whether it's issued by the central bank or private sector. I actually I'm agnostic about at this stage. But I think obviously the construction matters a lot, and the integrity and trust in that matters a lot. And there's some issues with some of the other stablecoins out there. So that's where I think a central bank can add a lot of value, is in the integrity of a stablecoin to the industry.
Oh, interesting. Okay. And so, you talked about, just the potential of where we're going in terms of the decentralization of financial services in general. So if we were, and you talked about some examples where some of the things we could be doing, but if you were to place yourself, let's say 5 or 10 years out from now, how do you envision some services and ways that we're going to be operating at that time, or could be if we get it right and move more quickly?
Well, I envision a future where financial services are accessible to everybody, instant, seamless, delightful, not inaccessible unless you have a lot of money, costly, clunky, friction-filled, frustrating, complicated, overwhelming, all the words we would probably use to describe them today. And I think we're on our way there. I mean, I'm excited. Forget, the world of decentralized finance and blockchain. Just digitization is taking a huge step in that direction. I look at our business, our trade business, something like 10% of all the clients we have on trade, which is quite a number of Canadians, identify as part of the LGBTQ plus community. And that's relative to a 4% of the population, and a community that in many ways feels often like their needs are not met by traditional financial services. And when I think about 80% of our clients, here in Ontario, I think 20% of all people under 45 are clients of Wealthsimple product in Ontario. Young people have not been traditionally served very well by financial services. These are people with thin to no credit, so really struggle to start building a credit history. These are people that don't have substantial wealth, and so aren't that interesting to the traditional wealth management arm of a bank, unless they're perhaps the child of a wealthy parent client or something like that. And I think one of the things we're just so excited about is building a more inclusive financial services industry that removes the friction that gets in the way of people making good decisions. Ultimately, our purpose is all around this idea of how do you create financial freedom for people, which the dean of Harvard said this so beautifully a few years ago. He said, there's no greater form of dignity you can offer another human being than financial freedom. When you think about it, all it really is choice. It's the choice to live the life you want and provide the life you want for your family. And I thought that was so beautiful, and is the opportunity and the challenge of companies like Wealthsimple in our industry today is how do we use these great things like technology, digital technology, blockchain technology to build more delightful, more seamless, frictionless experiences that help people, empower them to achieve better results.
So, on that spectrum of, where we are as to where we could be, where would you say we are in this evolution on a 1 to 10 scale in terms of, where we are compared to what we could be?
I think we're, 3 out of 10 today. And, I think that's saying something. I think, I actually think one of the things we're proud of at Wealthsimple is it feels like since we launched, just the industry is getting better. And the bar to compete on what a client's expectations of their financial services partner has gotten higher, and people have had to create better experiences and service and value prop. But we have so much room to go to create that, automated, almost magical, delightful experience that really reshapes the way people think about their financial partner and how they partner with them through their entire life cycle to achieve those goals they have in the long run.
I have a bit of a tougher question from somebody in the audience, but it's something that I think is top of mind for a lot of people. And that's when going back to the conversation around crypto and all the exciting, opportunities that it potentially presents. But it is a large user of energy, and there are a lot of environmental concerns around it. So, the question is, how do you justify that move given all the other considerations around the climate, et cetera, and the damage that crypto does do to the environment?
This is a very common argument, and I think has a lot of things to pay attention to. I think it gets a little bit nuanced when you think about where energy production really happens in the value chain of cryptocurrencies. A lot of it in the mining stage, which, from a Wealthsimple standpoint, is not really something that we have virtually anything to do with today. And I think we're still asking ourselves, what is our role? We've actually recently hired a consultant to help us try to identify what is the footprint of are crypto businesses exist? It's actually not a very cut and dry, easy thing to answer. And so our first step is to understand it. And then actually we hope to create ways for our clients and the company as a whole to address that as part of this. Because I think at the highest level, we could make the argument about almost anything. I mean, I hear it often about space travel too, which is you think about the emissions of sending a rocket into space. Therefore, we should not be sending rockets into space or satellites into space or space exploration in general. And I think that that's wrong. And actually, if you look at the comparative emissions of something like space to so many of the destructive things we are doing to the environment, I think there are ways that we need to, as a society, figure out how to do both, how to address the urgent climate crisis and stop so much of the destructive activity that we're doing and invest in the right offsets and programs that build a renewable future, and ensure that we're also able to invest in the progress that we as a humanity, I think, need. And that's not easy. I think this is one of the great challenges of our time, why Wealthsimple has invested so much in our socially responsible investment options, why we try to really drive that connection of our clients to how their dollars can help actually with the climate crisis. But I think it needs to be thought of in context of progress and all the ways we can address those issues along the way.
Okay. So, as we think about, moving forward and what Canada and, Canadians need to think about, I'd love to get your thoughts in terms of what advice you would give first to up and coming entrepreneurs who are thinking about building businesses in Canada. And the second will be for policymakers. But first, let's just start with entrepreneurs.
I just read a wonderful book by the founder of D Hawk. And it was just, it ended with one, it's just so perfect. So he has maybe like two things that I think are just wonderful. One is, it is no failure to fall short of realizing all we might dream. The failure is to fall short of dreaming all we might realize. And I believe that Canada is one of the great countries in the world. And I also believe, as we've talked about, that we're in this position of precariousness because we can't take that for granted, or we're heading in only one direction from here. Mm-hmm. And so I guess the challenge to Canadians and Canadian entrepreneurs is help build the future Canada that you want to be a part of. What are the sorts of companies that we're going to need to produce here? What are the sorts of challenges? Maybe even forget companies, just start with what are the challenges that we need to tackle as Canadians, as humankind, and be your boldest, most ambitious self and do that here. And I think it's never been easier. Doesn't mean it will be easier, but it's never been easier. And I just have so much excitement for what our Canadian entrepreneurs of the next generation are going to accomplish. And like you mentioned, 1Password, I think Wealthsimple set a record last year as the biggest private financing in tech in history. Wonderful milestone. Was so excited when we were surpassed by 1Password. And I tell all of our team, I can't wait when people leave the company to go start their own businesses. It's a handshake, and I can't wait till you go build something bigger and more impactful than what we've been able to achieve, because that's what we should be striving for. So that's my advice: is go get started. I guess is how I would try and boil it down in a nutshell.
Okay. And what about for our intrepid policy advisors, because our policymakers, because I mean, that's, they're a huge part of this puzzle as well. And, I've definitely, written a book where demonstrating just how impactful policy really is to our ability to innovate, foster growth, and scale. They do it, entrepreneurs, especially in the tech space, they go out there, they do things, and then often will ask for permission later. But there is a huge role to play in terms of government regulation. So, Canadians love stability. They want it. They're not huge risk takers. So how do we thread that needle between creating an environment that is stable and there's strong foundation, secure, we're building trust into that system, but at the same time really allows entrepreneurs to go out there and try something new and not get held back by bottlenecks in the system?
I think you've articulated the challenge well. I think we as policymakers and regulators need to think about not just protecting the status quo, but protecting the future and enabling the future of this country. That needs to become part of the mandate. Because unless that becomes, when you think about a regulator's job, in so many ways, 99% of what a regulator does is apply rules as they exist today. Mm-hmm. And they get a very small capacity and team to really think about what are the frameworks we need for the future. We need to change that. We need to make it part of the mandate to create the enabling conditions for our industries, for our companies, for Canadians to thrive. And so that would be my challenge. And I see it less as a threat. Change is less of a threat, not even an opportunity, but almost an obligation or a responsibility to the future of the country to make that part of the mandate and to think about the conditions we need to create for success.
Does that require, we talk about this a lot in Canada, but just a closer connection with, business in a more collaborative way? There's often been, there's silos as we've talked about across this country, provincially, et cetera. How good have we been at breaking those up and getting more, building these public-private kind of collaborative, spaces for us to really iterate on this in a responsible way?
I think that I know that all the private sector leaders that I work with, collaborate with, are eager to work more closely with policymakers and regulators on enabling the future in which they can succeed. And while I don't know of the formula of how to do that really well, I think that we need to acknowledge there is deep appetite and deep expertise from industry. On the world of crypto, as an example, we've tried to present and have presented several times to the regulators across Canada about what's happening in this industry. It's hard to keep track of. Let us share our insights and what's going on. But there does need to be more collaboration to figure out these answers, because I think if we each work in silos, we'll just continue to butt heads on some of these issues, and I think that will impede progress.
Okay, well, listen, it has been an incredible conversation. It's flown by. I could sit here and ask you questions.
I would even ask you one last thought to just throw out there, because in the spirit of like out of the box ideas, right? Sometimes we also need to approach. It's nice to say we need to collaborate more. Sometimes we also just need a different approach. Mm-hmm. And so, I'm not saying this is the right answer, and this has certainly not been vetted or worked, through any policymakers. But another idea would say, hey, we think that blockchain is an industry in which Canada wants to compete. And we think it's going to be really hard to do that in the context of the traditional regulatory landscape, because regulators have their hands full. They've got to, deal with fiat regulatory regime, which is a huge industry and has huge implications. So we're going to carve it out. We're going to create a new, body responsible for that, blank sheet of paper, thinking about on a national basis how the conditions we'd set it up for success. And crypto wouldn't have to be the only model for doing that. So I think we should also not rule out just totally different ways of approaching solutions to some of these, what might feel like intractable problems at times. I'll stop there.
Yes, well, the gauntlet has been thrown. The challenge is there. And for the policymakers listening, there's your cue to start thinking about how we can build this in a different way. And you've got business leaders ready to collaborate and work with you on that. With that, Mike, I want to thank you so much for your time today. What a great conversation. It was so good to see you, and onwards and upwards. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Always fun.
Thanks, Andrea. The call to leadership today is that we should all do our part to build a better Canada, the Canada that we want, a Canada that competes around the world, and is bold about it. Michael, I appreciated those comments that we got to sometimes bet on winners, and that means betting on ourselves as Canadians. So thank you for betting on so many of us in the endeavor that you've undertaken to build Wealthsimple. We appreciated you here today. Andrea, you're an expert moderator. We thank you so much for your time, energy, and effort in facilitating this conversation. And there are a lot of policymakers with us today and policy advisors. So you're also on the hook to help us build a better place that creates value for all of us. I want to thank our sponsors, Osler and Power Corporation of Canada. We appreciate your generous support. Thank you as well to our AV supplier, Van Valkenburg Communications and livemedia.ca for making our meeting possible today. We'll hope you'll join us for some upcoming events. We'll be here tomorrow, January 27th, where we'll host a discussion on the need to catch up on routine immunizations here in Canada and increase access to vaccines as we continue to live and recover from COVID-19. On February 1st, we'll be joined by Lululemon, LifeWorks, Olympians Ashley Lawrence and Haley Wickensizer for a conversation on mental health and well-being in sport and in business. To learn more about other upcoming events, explore our newly designed website, canadianclub.org. You can also look at the archives of past speeches and historical events. Thank you again for joining us. Please stay healthy and stay safe. Bye-bye, everyone.